I was sitting in that cold leather chair, the kind that sticks to your skin in summer. The lawyer's office smelled like old paper and air freshener trying to cover up something rotten. Then he slid the file across the polished table like it meant nothing. Your father's assets have already been transferred to James. I blinked. James Carter? I asked, half laughing, half drowning. My stepbrother? Yes, he replied, not even looking up. Per the updated will. It felt like I'd been sucker punched by a ghost. James, who didn't even show up to the funeral. James, who used to call my dad the ATM. My throat went dry, but I pushed out the question anyway. And the house. The house, the cars, the business. Everything. I don't remember walking out. I just remember the heat in my ears and the taste of metal in my mouth. Like something inside me snapped and reassembled sharper. Have you ever had someone steal what your father built, while smiling in your face like it was theirs all along? Tell me where you're watching from if you've ever been stabbed by someone you once called family. My dad, Michael Carter, was the kind of man who smelled like sawdust, coffee, and Sunday morning pancakes. He built his construction business from nothing, just one pickup truck, a set of rusted tools, and a vision. But he built me just as carefully. Piece by piece. With patience. With purpose. Mom died when I was 9. It was just us after that. I don't remember much about the funeral, just Dad holding my hand so tightly it turned white. He whispered, "We're gonna be okay, Em. I promise." And somehow, we were. He taught me how to ride a bike, how to hammer a nail, how to fix a toilet when it wouldn't stop running at 2 a.m. He showed me how to balance a checkbook before I learned algebra. He used to say, "You're not just my daughter, you're my right hand." On the weekends, we'd drive out to Miller's Lake with his red and white fishing poles sticking out the truck bed. No phones. No distractions. Just me, him, and the water. He told me stories about how he met my mom, high school sweethearts in Kansas City, and how he knew she was the one because she laughed with her whole body. He never remarried for a long time. Just us two, holding it down. I remember one summer, I was 14, I got bullied at school. Some older girl called me the motherless charity case. I ran home in tears, locked myself in my room. Dad didn't knock. He just sat outside my door and started telling me a story. Did I ever tell you about the time your mom dropped a whole wedding cake on her lap? In front of my boss. His voice cracked a little. I opened the door. We laughed until our bellies hurt. He made life feel safe. That's why when he introduced her, Claire, everything started to shift. He met her at a charity auction. She was elegant, polished, the kind of woman who always wore white and never had a stain on her blouse. At first, I tried to give her a chance. She was kind in that polite, almost artificial way. She brought over homemade banana bread and asked me about school, but her eyes wandered around the house like she was mentally rearranging the furniture. Dad lit up when he talked about her. And I loved him too much to get in the way of that. I smiled at the engagement announcement. I even stood beside him at the tiny backyard wedding. And then came James, Claire's son. 2 years older than me. All bravado, no backbone. He called me half-sister Hallmark because I once gave Dad a handmade Father's Day card. He moved in with us just before I turned 18. I was applying for colleges, managing Dad's books at the construction office after school, and suddenly James was eating off plates he never washed and blasting music while I studied. But Dad, he tried. He made us do movie nights. He planned family dinners. He pushed for us to find common ground. One night, we were watching Field of Dreams. James scoffed at the emotional ending. "Why are you crying, Emily? It's just a stupid baseball ghost." Dad snapped at him, rare for him. Show some respect. That was the first and last time Dad ever raised his voice at James. But I noticed things started changing. Dad was getting older. Tired. His back was acting up. He stopped going to job sites. He started talking more about legacy and succession. He never said it directly, but I could feel the weight of the future in his silences. One evening, while he and I were organizing old family photos, he pulled out a dusty envelope. "This is for you," he said. "Don't open it unless something ever feels wrong." I asked what he meant. He just smiled. I trust you to know. Then came the heart attack. It was sudden, brutal. He collapsed while locking up the warehouse. I was at college in Boston. I flew back on the first flight. Claire didn't call me until the next morning, after he had passed. At the funeral, James showed up in a tailored suit like he was the grieving heir to a kingdom. He stood in the front row while I clutched my dad's old work gloves, the ones stained with oil and drywall dust. They buried him next to Mom. The house felt so empty after that. The silence was louder than anything I'd ever heard. And yet, something told me this story wasn't over. Not even close. The first red flag didn't wave, it whispered. 3 weeks after the funeral, I drove back to the house with the plan of helping Claire sort through Dad's things. I brought 2 boxes, a journal, and a bottle of wine I knew Dad had saved for my graduation. But when I pulled up to the driveway, my key didn't work. I jiggled it, checked the label, and tried again. Same result. James opened the door, shirtless, holding a smoothie. "Oh," he said casually. "We changed the locks." "We?" "Mom and I. Just felt like it was time for a security upgrade. Fresh start." I stared at him. "You didn't think to tell me?" He just shrugged. "Didn't think you'd be dropping by unannounced. I didn't push it, not then." I reminded myself they were grieving too. I walked back to my car with that unopened bottle of wine still in my tote bag, and a tightness in my chest I couldn't name. Next came the garage. Dad's workshop was his pride. He spent weekends there, fixing everything from lawn mowers to antique radios. It smelled like cedar and gasoline, and I knew every drawer blindfolded. When I went back a few days later, this time after calling Claire, it was gutted. The tool wall was gone. The benches cleared. His journals and sketches vanished. Claire greeted me with forced cheer. "Oh, honey, we donated all of that." It was cluttering up the space. "James is thinking of turning it into a fitness room." "Donated to where?" I asked, my voice cracking. She blinked slowly.
"Some community center."
"I can't remember the name." I walked out without saying another word. That night, I sat on my dorm bed and clutched the envelope Dad gave me.
I didn't open it yet.
Something inside me said, "Not now. Not yet." 2 months later, I got a letter in the mail, not a call, not an email, a letter from a law firm in Denver. It was addressed to Miss Emily Carter and typed in cold courier font. "Dear Miss Carter, this notice is to inform you that the primary business holdings and associated assets of Carter and Company Construction have been legally transferred to Mr. James Everett." My hands were trembling. Carter and Company wasn't just a business. It was Dad's soul on concrete. It was the legacy he promised we'd run together someday. I had shadowed him since high school, helped with the payroll, even picked out the new office printer the year before. And James? James once showed up drunk to a safety seminar and asked if OSHA was a new brand of sneakers. I drove back home that weekend, no warning, no calls. Just me, a duffel bag, and a slow-burning rage. Claire greeted me with a tight-lipped smile. "Emily, I wish you'd called. We're having company." "I need to talk to James," I said flatly. He was in Dad's old office, now repainted in sleek gray with LED strips on the shelves. He had turned it into his own little CEO lair. My father's framed photo of the mayor, replaced by a motivational quote print. "Hustle harder." "You got my letter?" James asked, spinning in the leather chair that used to creak when Dad sat in it. I stood there, fists clenched.
"Why?
Why would you do this? Why would you take over something you never cared about?" He leaned back. "Because Dad left it to me." "That's impossible." He said we'd run it together. He trusted me. James reached into the drawer and pulled out a folder. He updated the will. Said I had the right vision for the company. Maybe he changed his mind. Maybe he didn't know what he was signing, I snapped. He smirked. "You sound paranoid." Over the next few weeks, it got worse. Claire and James began selling things. The old camper Dad took me in every summer?
Gone.
His signed baseball from the 1985 Royals game? Listed on eBay. But what hurt most was how silent the rest of the family was. Uncle Rick, Dad's younger brother, told me, "It's none of my business, Em." Maybe your dad had his reasons. My cousin Amanda, who used to come over every Thanksgiving, ghosted me completely. Even people from church were polite but distant. Only one person reached out, Mr. Ellis, Dad's oldest employee. He texted me. Heard what happened. Not right. Your dad would never have left you out. That text stayed on my lock screen for days. I started digging. I requested records, read every clause of the will, and hired a legal advisor from campus. That's when I found it. The will had been updated 10 days before Dad's heart attack. And the witness? Claire's cousin, a real estate agent in Texas. My advisor raised his eyebrows. This isn't standard. Usually, a change of this magnitude would be verified with third-party counsel, not family. Can we fight it? He hesitated. It depends on what else you have. That night, I opened the envelope Dad gave me. Inside was a single-page letter in his handwriting. Emily, if you're reading this, it means something didn't feel right. I don't know what tomorrow holds, but I want you to remember. I built everything for us, not just them. Trust yourself. Follow the paper trail. Love always.
Dad.
I stared at it for hours. That's when the shift happened. The pain turned to fuel. And I knew the real fight was just beginning. I still remember the exact moment the phone rang. It was 5:48 p.m. on a Thursday. I was sitting in the library at Emerson, reviewing a project on ethical business law. I had just texted Dad a picture of an old photo I found. Us at Miller's Lake, me holding up a fish half my size. He never replied. The number on my screen was unfamiliar. Denver area code. I picked up, already uneasy. Is this Emily Carter? A voice asked, clipped, official. Yes. This is St. Joseph's Memorial Hospital. I'm calling regarding your father, Michael Carter. He was brought in approximately 20 minutes ago in cardiac distress. I'm very sorry, but he didn't survive. I don't remember breathing after that. I don't remember hanging up the phone. I just remember the noise, or lack of it. Like the entire world had been unplugged. The flight back to Denver was a blur. I don't know how I got on the plane. I don't even remember packing. My roommate, Julia, must have done it for me. All I remember was looking out of the plane window, willing it not to be real. When I arrived at the hospital, they took me to a room, dim, sterile, too clean to hold what I was about to see. Dad lay there under white sheets, still. Too still. His face was peaceful, but not right. Not without life. Not without his big laugh and the way he always cleared his throat before saying something important. I held his hand. It was cold. Dad, I whispered. You were supposed to wait for me. No one else was there. Not Claire. Not James. Just me and the man who raised me. I stayed until a nurse gently told me they had to move him. I nodded and walked out on legs that didn't feel like mine. The funeral was rushed. Claire arranged everything, without consulting me. The service was held at a funeral home he hated. The pastor mispronounced his middle name. James gave the eulogy and called Dad a mentor, which made me nauseous. I sat in the second row, because Claire and James had reserved the front for immediate family. Immediate family. As if I wasn't his daughter. They buried him in a suit he never wore, under a headstone with a quote that made no sense. Ambition is the bridge to success. He would have hated that. What he loved were Bob Dylan lyrics. Morning coffee, with too much sugar. The smell of sawdust. The sound of me calling him Pop on Saturdays. No one mentioned me in the obituary. No one read his favorite poem. I tried to speak, once, at the podium. Claire gently pulled me back. We agreed James would speak on behalf of the family, she whispered. I felt like I was watching a movie of someone else's life. I cried alone, behind the church, while people mingled and sipped lukewarm coffee inside. But the real betrayal came days later. I was still in Denver, staying at a friend's place, trying to process everything. I called Claire to ask if I could pick up some of Dad's things, letters, at least. Maybe that old flannel jacket he wore when we fixed up the deck. She said, "Oh, sweetheart, we already cleared everything out. James donated most of it." I paused. Donated? To Goodwill. We figured it was best to move on. Holding on to the past won't help anyone. My throat went dry. Did you even ask me what I wanted? She sighed. You're emotional, Emily. I know this is hard, but we all need to heal in our own way. I hung up before I said something I couldn't take back. That night, I went back to Dad's grave. It was raining, not pouring, just a steady, drizzling kind of grief. I sat there with a flashlight and the letter he gave me. The envelope was worn now, edges curled from being clutched too many times. I read it again. If you're reading this, it means something didn't feel right. Trust yourself. Follow the paper trail. The next day, I marched into the Carter and Company office. It felt different, colder, corporate. James had installed security cameras, changed the logo, and replaced the break room fridge with a branded espresso machine. Emily, he said with a smirk when I walked in. You should have called. I don't need to call, I snapped. I'm here for my father's files. Which files? All of them. He laughed. You're not on the paperwork anymore. That word again anymore. Then I'll get them another way, I said quietly, staring him dead in the eye. And I walked out. Later that week, I requested a formal copy of the updated will. When I received it, something felt wrong immediately. The signature at the bottom? Too clean. Too careful. Dad always signed with a slight tremor in his hand, especially after years of manual labor. This signature was smooth, controlled. It looked forged. The witness line? A cousin of Claire's. And the lawyer? A friend of James's from college, not Dad's usual estate attorney. I called that attorney Mr. Lowell, who had handled Dad's business for over 2 decades. When I told him about the changes, there was a long pause. Emily, I didn't draft any new will. Last I checked, your father's original plan still had you listed as primary beneficiary. What? I'd like to see this new version. So I faxed it to him. He called me back within hours. This doesn't look right. This might be challengeable. My hands trembled as I sat there. My father was gone. His legacy rewritten. His house no longer mine. His memories erased from the rooms we shared. But he had left me the truth. And now, I had the fuel to uncover everything. They took everything from me, but they didn't see my next move coming.
I didn't sleep that night.
I sat at the kitchen table of my college apartment with Dad's letter on one side and the will on the other. A half-eaten slice of pizza went cold next to my laptop. I opened a new document and started outlining everything I had.
Dates.
Signatures. Discrepancies. Claire's cousin listed as witness. James's college friend listed as lawyer. No record from Mr. Lowell, the attorney my dad had worked with for 23 years. This wasn't just shady. It was a setup. The next day, I hired a forensic document examiner. I used the last of my scholarship refund check to pay the retainer. Ms. Valerie Monroe was a quiet, sharp-eyed woman who wore navy suits and spoke like she'd seen everything twice. She examined both signatures, the one on the will and the one on Dad's original estate documents from years prior. There are inconsistencies, she said. Pressure patterns, stroke speed. This signature was likely traced or written by someone attempting to replicate it. My heart pounded in my ears. Can we prove that in court?
She didn't blink.
I've testified in federal cases. If I sign off on this, it'll hold. That was all I needed to hear. I filed a petition to contest the will. Claire and James were served notices within 2 weeks. James tried to call me. I let it ring. Claire sent an email, pretending to be confused. Emily, sweetheart, we're so sorry this has caused you distress. Let's talk this out privately as a family. I forwarded the email to my attorney. The court date was set for March 3rd. I arrived in a navy dress Dad once called my warrior color. My attorney, Ms. Regina Owens, walked beside me like a general. The courtroom smelled like dust and air conditioning. The judge, an older woman named Honorable Deborah Matson, had the face of someone who didn't tolerate nonsense. James looked confident. Too confident. Claire wore a white blouse like she was the grieving widow of the year. I watched her wipe invisible tears with a tissue that never got wet. Their attorney tried to delay the hearing.
Denied.
Tried to discredit the document examiner. Overruled. tried to paint me as the estranged daughter who only came around when there was money involved. That was when I stood. Your Honor, I said, voice shaking at first, then stronger. I was with my father every step of his business. I wasn't estranged. I was his partner, his daughter. I have ledgers with my handwriting next to his. Emails, photos, testimonies from clients who watched me grow up answering phones at the front desk. The idea that I just showed up for the money is insulting. I turned toward James. And you? You never clocked a day at the company. You didn't even come to his last hospital visit. He smirked but said nothing. Then I held up the letter. This is in my father's handwriting. Verified. Dated before the new will. He said, and I quote, "Follow the paper trail." Gasps rippled through the room. That's when I pulled out the final piece. A voicemail. One I hadn't wanted to hear at first, but now it was everything. I played it on a small speaker. My dad's voice filled the courtroom. Hey, Em. Just wanted to tell you I've been thinking. About the business. About the future. You're the only one I trust to carry it forward. Claire's pushing me to change a few things, but I'm holding off. I want you to review everything with me next week. Love you, sweetheart. The courtroom went still. Even the judge leaned forward slightly. Claire's face went pale. James stared straight ahead, jaw clenched. The judge called for a recess. 20 minutes later, we were back. Judge Madsen adjusted her glasses. It is the court's opinion that substantial doubt has been cast upon the validity of the updated will. Until a formal forensic inquiry is completed, all asset transfers are hereby frozen. It wasn't over yet,
But it was the beginning of the end.
outside the courtroom, James caught up with me in the hallway. You think this makes you better than us? No, I said calmly. It just makes me his daughter. He opened his mouth like he wanted to say something cruel, but nothing came out. Claire stayed behind.
She didn't even look at me.
Weeks later, their attorney contacted mine. They wanted to settle. They knew they'd lose. I agreed, not because I wanted to make peace, but because I wanted it over. I regained control of Carter and Company, my father's house, and personal effects. James and Claire got a payout, not a legacy.
A check.
One time. Cold and transactional. They took what they could. But I kept what mattered.
His name. His story.
His truth. And the day I stepped back into Dad's office, the real office, not James's LED-lit ego shrine, I stood by his old desk and ran my fingers across the wood. There, in the drawer, untouched, was a photo of us from Miller's Lake. I held it close to my heart and whispered, "We did it, Pop." Victory doesn't feel the way people imagine. It wasn't some dramatic, movie-style triumph with music and applause. It was quiet, lonely, like standing on top of a mountain you were never supposed to climb, and realizing there's no one there to celebrate with you. I moved back into Dad's house 2 weeks after the court order was finalized. The locks were changed again, this time by me. I didn't touch James's renovations right away. The office still had the LED lights. The bedroom still smelled faintly, like Claire's perfume. I walked through the halls and tried to recognize the home I grew up in, but it was like someone had painted over my memories with neutral tones. The neighbors were polite. Some even nodded at me like they were proud, like I'd done something brave. But no one really reached out. No casseroles. No invitations. Just silent, polite distance. Uncle Rick texted once. "Glad it worked out, Em. Hope you're okay." Amanda, my cousin, never spoke to me again. I overheard someone at church whisper, "Well, you know, she sued her family." Like it had all been some greedy stunt. Like I'd flipped a table for few checks. They didn't know the half of it. They didn't know how many nights I sat alone at the kitchen table with Dad's old mug and a box of files I couldn't bear to put away. The grief hit harder in the quiet moments. The mornings were the worst. Dad used to make the worst scrambled eggs, dry, oversalted, but always served with a grin. Now it was just me and the echo of silence. I found his old work boots in the back of the closet. I sat on the floor and cried, holding them like they were some kind of anchor to keep me from drifting into full collapse. And then came the letter. One I didn't expect. It was from Mr. Ellis, the longtime foreman at Carter and Company. Emily, I've worked with your dad for 27 years. I was there when he laid the first concrete foundation in that muddy lot behind 4th Street. He always said you were the best thing he ever built. I'm retiring this year. I wanted you to know you made him proud. He told me once, Emily's got more grit in her pinky than James has in his whole body.
Keep building.
Ellis. I read that letter 100 times. Framed it. But not everyone left. Julia, my college roommate, drove down for a weekend, brought snacks and blankets, and refused to leave my side. You won, she said. And you're still carrying everyone's silence like it's your fault. I didn't reply. Start talking, she nudged. Or I'm hiding hot sauce in every room of this house. So I started telling the story to her. To myself. Out loud. One night, I told her about the time Dad and I painted the hallway and left a tiny smiley face behind a mirror. We found it. Still there. That smiley face felt like a sign from him. Like he'd never really left. I started journaling. Not for therapy. Just to keep track of what the grief felt like. How sometimes it was sharp and sudden, like a knife in the ribs. Other times it was dull and heavy, like a blanket soaked in cold water draped over your shoulders. I wrote about the trial. About the smell of the courthouse. The way James looked when he realized he lost. About Claire's frozen smile and the way her hands trembled when I brought out Dad's voicemail.
But mostly I wrote about him.
His laugh. The way he used to ruffle my hair, even when I was too old for it. The stupid way he said pop quiz every time we walked into a diner, then quizzed me on license plates. I filled pages with memories. Because I refused to let them be stolen, too. Fall rolled into winter. I hosted Thanksgiving by myself. Just me, Julia, and Mr. Ellis, who brought a homemade pumpkin pie and pretended not to cry when he saw Dad's chair at the head of the table. The next day, I found the first negative article online. A local blog. Air of chaos. Carter legacy torn by family feud. It painted James and Claire as misunderstood. Claimed I pounced on grieving relatives to snatch up the company. I closed the browser. People believe what's convenient, not what's right. But I knew the truth. And so did my father. In the months that followed, I began to understand what mourning really meant. It wasn't just grieving the dead. It was grieving the version of your life you thought you'd have. The version where family supported you. Where your name in the will wasn't a battlefield. Where love didn't come with conditions. I grieved the loss of innocence. The loss of believing that blood meant loyalty. And I let myself feel it. No more pretending to be okay. No more telling people, I'm fine. I wasn't. But I was healing. One night, I stood outside in the backyard under the stars. The same spot Dad and I used to sit in folding chairs and drink cocoa in winter. I whispered into the cold air. You were right. About all of it. I followed the trail. Dad. I followed it all the way. The wind rustled through the pine trees like it was answering. That night, I slept for the first time in weeks. Not just passed out, slept. The kind of sleep that only comes when a storm inside you starts to settle. Spring came slowly that year. The trees outside Dad's house began to bloom again, just like they always did. But for the first time, I noticed. I used to walk past those trees like they were wallpaper. Background noise. Now I stopped. Looked. Breathed. Grief had stripped me down. But in that stripped-down place, I found something raw and real. Stillness. And the beginning of something new. I started by reclaiming the house, room by room. First the office. I ripped down every cold, gray, sterile remnant of James's makeover. I found Dad's old pencil holder in a storage bin, the one shaped like a tiny toolbox. I put it back on the desk. Then I cleared the garage, made it feel like a workshop again. I bought a pegboard, hung tools, even re-oiled the workbench. I played old Johnny Cash records while I worked, just like Dad used to. And then one night, I opened his journal, the one I had refused to read. Page after page of notes, sketches, business ideas, and sprinkled in between little entries about me. Fixed the faucet today. Did it better than I could. Proud of her today. She stood up to a supplier who tried to cheat us. Sometimes I forget she's not 10 anymore. Hope she knows she's already made me proud, no matter what happens next. I cried.
Quietly.
Fully. Then I framed the last page and hung it above my desk. I didn't just rebuild the house.
I rebuilt my life.
I started therapy, real therapy, not just venting to friends over coffee. My therapist, Dr. Naomi Fields, was warm and wise, with a kind of calm that settled the air in the room. The first few sessions, I barely spoke. Just sat there, staring at my hands. But she was patient. And eventually, the words came. The pain. The betrayal. The loss. The fear that maybe I was the villain, like the blog said. She looked at me and said something I still carry with me. The people who hurt you knew what they were doing. And the people who doubted you didn't know what you were made of. I also reached out to Mr. Ellis again, not just to say thank you, but to ask if he'd come out of retirement for one more job. He laughed. Only for you, kid. Together, we started organizing a mentorship program through Carter and Company, one that trained high school girls in construction basics. Carpentry, electrical, blueprint reading. I called it Right-Hand Women. Dad would have loved it. I remember telling Julia the name, and she said, "That's so you. You're literally turning grief into a hammer." We both laughed until we cried. And something else happened too, something small but meaningful. I got a letter in the mail. From a woman named Marissa, my father's first secretary from way back when. She had seen the articles, the courtroom drama, the social media noise. Her letter was handwritten on blue stationery. Emily, I watched you grow up behind that front desk, helping your dad sort invoices, color and blueprints with crayons, asking way too many questions.
He adored you.
You didn't just inherit his company. You earned it. Keep leading.
He's still with you.
I pinned it on my corkboard, next to the journal page, next to the photo of me and Dad at Miller's Lake. In time, the silence in the house became peaceful instead of painful. I started baking again, playing guitar again, going on walks without crying in public. I even painted the guest room, sage green, and I opened the guest book. The first person to sign it? Julia. The second? Mr. Ellis. And the third, well, that surprised me. It was Amanda. She showed up one day unannounced. "I'm sorry," she said simply. I didn't know what to believe. We talked. Really talked. And though it didn't fix everything, it started something new. I wasn't the same girl who walked into that courtroom, shaking with rage and loss. I had boundaries now.
A voice.
A legacy I was no longer afraid to claim. Not because of the money. Not the house. Not even the company. But because it carried his name. Because when I looked in the mirror, I could finally see me again, but stronger. Not in spite of what I'd lost, but because of how I fought for what mattered. If you've watched this far, thank you. Not just for your time, but for witnessing this story. For listening when, for a long time, I felt no one would. For sitting with me through the grief, the anger, the heartbreak, and the healing. I know I'm not the only one who's been betrayed by people they called family. I know I'm not the only one who stood at a grave, not just mourning the person in it, but the silence that followed. The fake hugs. The small talk that felt like glass splinters. If you've ever been the black sheep, if you've ever been the one who fought for truth and got labeled dramatic or difficult or greedy, if you've ever looked at the people you trusted and realized, they don't see me, I see you. And you are not alone. I've learned that sometimes family isn't the people who raised you. It's the people who show up when it matters. Who stand beside you when you shake. Who hand you tools instead of excuses. I've learned that grief doesn't go away, it grows roots. But if you take care of it, water it with truth and action, it can grow into something strong. Something alive. Something that becomes your why. My dad once told me, legacy isn't about what you leave behind. It's about what you stand up for while you're still here.
So here I am,
standing. Not just for my father's memory, but for myself. For every person who's ever had to fight to be heard. For every woman who walked into a room full of people who doubted her, and stayed anyway. I don't know what battle you're in right now. Maybe it's family drama. Maybe it's a quiet betrayal no one else sees. Maybe it's the aching silence after someone you loved left. Whatever it is, I want you to hear this. You're not crazy. You're not selfish. You're not too emotional. You're awake. And that's brave. If this story moved you, share your story in the comments. Tell me what part hit you hardest. Tell us, because there's a whole community here, whether you see it yet or not. Like this video if you felt seen. Subscribe if you want more raw, real stories from voices that don't get silenced. And if you're standing in the ashes of something someone tried to burn down in your life, just know you can rebuild. Stronger, wiser, louder. Because family isn't who shares your blood. It's who stands beside you when the will gets read and the wolves show their teeth. This is for the ones who are left out, but never back down. You're not alone anymore. We're with you. I'm with you. Always. Emily.